The auction square was a pit of noise and stink, boots on dusty stone, the jingle of coin, the sour smell of sweat and fear. I didn't hear a thing. Not after the steward's fat hand clamped down on my shoulder, forcing my knees into the dirt. He wasn't gentle. He wanted the crack of my bones on the cobblestones to be part of the show. A silk scarf, softer than anything I'd ever touched, was shoved into my palm. It felt wrong in my calloused hands, like a whisper in a blacksmith's shop. I knew what it was for without him saying a word. "You will serve her unseen," the steward hissed, his breath hot and foul against my ear. "No man is allowed to look upon the princess." That's all he said. No man, not even the dirt-caked ranch hand sold to pay off his uncle's gambling debts. I was a boy who grew up with the sun on my face and the smell of horses in my lungs. My world was the wide open sky, the horizon my only wall. Now I was just another piece of property, traded for a stack of gold, dragged into a world of shadows and whispers. A hush fell over the crowd. It wasn't a respectful silence. It was the kind of quiet that comes when a wolf walks into a sheep pen. The royal litter was coming. Its curtains were so heavy with gold thread they didn't even move in the breeze. The men carrying it moved with a kind of terrified care, like they were holding a lit bomb. They said she was cursed. They said to meet her eyes was to invite death, to have your soul shrivel up and turn to dust right inside your chest. So the nobles in their fine clothes, they all turned their heads away. But I could see them peeking from the corners of their eyes, hungry for a glimpse of the monster. The litter stopped right in front of me. The air got thick, heavy with a mix of awe and pure animal fear. I could feel it pressing on my skin. The steward yanked the silk scarf over my eyes, pulling the knot so tight it felt like it was grinding against my skull. Daylight vanished. I was blind in the middle of the day, kneeling in the dirt. And then I heard her. It was just a faint rustle of silk, the sound of someone taking a breath. But it wasn't the sound of a queen or a monster. It sounded like someone who was terribly, terribly alone. "He is strong enough," one of the guards announced, and the crowd laughed. It was a cruel sound. They were laughing at me, at this piece of meat bought to serve a ghost. Strength was the only thing that made me worth more than the horses I used to tend. I wanted to scream my name, to tell them I was more than muscle and bone, but pride was a quick way to die in a place like this. So I bit my tongue, swallowed the dust and the anger, and stayed perfectly still. Then a voice cut through the noise. It was soft, fragile as a bird's wing. "What is your name?" she asked. Nobody had warned me about this. Nobody had said the curse could speak. The steward hissed again, a snake's warning in my ear. "Silence. Remember the law." But her question just hung there in the dark, hot and bright. My lips wanted to move, my whole body ached to answer her, to give her that one small piece of me. But I said nothing. The knot of the blindfold pressed into my head, a constant reminder of the rules, of the walls that were now my world. I could feel her leaning closer, a strange warmth in the cold air, a sense of curiosity. Then she whispered, so low that only the two of us, in our own little bubble of darkness and silence, could hear. The words twisted everything I thought I knew. "Lift your eyes just once." My heart didn't beat. It stumbled. It fell down a flight of stairs inside my chest. In that 1 second, I knew. This wasn't a curse. This wasn't a myth told to scare children. This was a woman, a real woman, begging someone, anyone, not to treat her like she was invisible. The blindfold felt like it was on fire. Her words had lit a match inside my head, a blaze hotter than any desert sun I'd ever worked under. "Lift your eyes just once." The guards were close. I could hear the scrape of their boots on the stone, the jingle of their armor. The steward's warning hiss was still rattling in my ear, but her whisper was a roar that drowned out everything else. I wanted to do it. Gods, I wanted to. But fear is a cold, heavy thing. What if they were right? What if the stories were true? What if one look cost me my life? My hands clenched into fists, my knuckles turning white. I kept my head bowed, but inside something was breaking. They dragged me up and led me stumbling through the crowd, still blind. I felt the sun disappear as we passed under stone arches. The sounds of the city faded, replaced by a deep, heavy silence. The palace. The air changed completely. The honest smell of dust and sweat was gone, choked out by incense and roses. It was a sweet, cloying smell, the smell of decay hidden under perfume. It made my lungs feel tight. I was pushed back to my knees in a vast chamber. I could hear the rattle of chains somewhere nearby, and I knew this wasn't just a home. It was a prison made of gold and rules. When the guards finally left, the silence was so complete, it felt like it was screaming. It stretched and stretched until it felt like it was about to snap. Then I heard her again, her footsteps soft on the marble floor, coming closer. My heart started hammering against my ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage. I felt like I was running a race, even though I hadn't moved an inch. "You may speak now," she said. Her voice was still trembling, like a person who had been given a sword but had never been taught how to hold it. I swallowed, the sound loud in the quiet room. I told her my name. It felt strange to say it here. The sound of it seemed to surprise her, as if she'd never heard a man answer her so directly before. She whispered it back to herself like she was tasting the word, feeling the shape of it. For a second, something inside me settled. I wanted to tell her I wasn't afraid of any curse, but the courage got stuck in my throat, tangled in the silence. Then, in a rush of words, she said something no princess should ever say. "I was never asked if I wanted this life." My pulse beat a frantic rhythm in my ears. In the darkness of my blindfold, I could see her loneliness more clearly than I'd ever seen a face. A princess hidden from the world, a ghost in her own home. Her own beauty, the thing they whispered about, had become chains far heavier than any I would ever wear. My throat was tight, but I forced the words out. They came out rough, like scraping stone. "Then let me be the first to see you." I heard her gasp. It was a sharp, shocked sound, as if the floor had just cracked open between us. I braced myself for a scream, for the guards to come rushing back in. Instead, I felt the cloth over my eyes begin to loosen. A hand, small and trembling, was untying the knot at the back of my head. The blindfold slid away, and the darkness I had been living in for what felt like a lifetime shattered into a million pieces. Light hit my eyes so hard it was like a physical blow. But it wasn't the sun that blinded me. It was her. The world rushed back in, sharp and painfully bright. The first thing I saw was the light itself, pouring through huge jeweled windows, painting rainbows on the stone walls. But then my eyes found her. She was standing so close I could see the tiny tremors in her hands as she clutched the discarded blindfold. Her fingers were wrapped around it like it was a guilty secret she couldn't let go of. The whispers in the town square, the stories told by firelight, they were all lies. They spoke of a cursed princess, a monster so dangerous she had to be hidden, a beauty so potent it could drive a man to madness. The woman in front of me wasn't a curse. She was a person, the loneliest person I had ever seen. Her eyes met mine. They were dark, not like a void, but like a stormy sky, filled with 1,000 feelings she'd never been allowed to show. For a long moment we just stood there, frozen. The world stopped spinning. My breath hitched in my throat, but I refused to look away. Fear was still gnawing at me, a rat in my belly, but I wouldn't let it win. This wasn't a monster. This was a woman who was screaming, without making a sound, just to be seen, to be more than a rumor, more than a title. She shivered, a tiny, violent movement, as if every second our eyes were locked was another rule being ripped away from her skin. "No one," she whispered, and her voice broke on the words. "No one has ever dared." Her lips trembled, and she quickly dropped her gaze, as if she were ashamed of the very gift she had just given me. The gift of seeing her. I wanted to speak, to tell her there was nothing to be afraid of, but the words wouldn't come. Because at that exact moment, the chamber doors didn't just open. They slammed wide, crashing against the stone walls with a sound like thunder. 3 guards stormed in. My whole body went rigid. My heart felt like it was trying to escape my chest. But she just lifted her chin. All the trembling was gone. She looked at them, and her voice, when it came, was as sharp and cold as the steel of their swords. "Leave us!" The guards stopped dead in their tracks. Confusion washed over their faces. It was clear they had never heard her speak like that before. They had heard the whispers of a timid girl, not the command of a queen. For a second, they just stared. But then years of training took over. They bowed, their eyes still full of suspicion, and backed out of the room. But I knew. I knew they were just on the other side of that door, their ears pressed against the wood, listening to the silence. My knees ached from the cold marble floor, but I didn't get up. I couldn't. I had broken their most sacred law. I had looked at her, and I still couldn't look away. She saw it. She saw the way I was staring, the way my eyes were drinking her in, and a faint blush colored her cheeks. It was a fragile thing, but fierce. Then, in a whisper so faint I almost didn't hear it, she asked the one question no royal should ever have to ask. "Do you think I am cursed?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut, because in that moment I finally understood. The curse wasn't in her. It was the lie. It was the story they had wrapped around her since the day she was born, a chain made of words to keep her hidden, to keep her powerless. I shook my head slowly. My voice, when it came, was raw. "You're not cursed. You're human." For the first time since I'd met her, her lips parted into something that was almost a smile. But it was a sad smile, draped in sorrow. She leaned closer, her shadow falling over me, and whispered words that were both a plea and a death sentence. "Then keep seeing me, before they take you away." Her words echoed in my chest, a cold drumbeat of warning. "Before they take you away." It wasn't a question of if, but when. The silence in the chamber felt different now. It was heavier, filled with the weight of unseen eyes. The guards were gone, but the whispers had already started their journey down the long stone corridors. I had done the one thing forbidden, and a price would be demanded. The princess didn't seem to notice. She turned away from me, drifting towards the tall, arched windows, like a ghost in her own home. The discarded blindfold was still clutched in her hand, looking like a dead white bird. She lifted her face to the sliver of sky visible through the colored glass, and for the first time I saw her take a full, deep breath, as if the air in this room had been too thin to breathe until now. "All my life," she said, her voice soft and distant, "I have been told my face would bring down kingdoms, that my eyes would bring ruin to any man who met them. They wrapped me in shadows and called it protection. They taught me to see my own reflection and feel shame. Do you know what it is to live your entire life unseen?" I swallowed, the lump in my throat hard as a stone. "I do now," I said, my voice quiet but steady. She glanced back at me over her shoulder, and a flicker of surprise lit her eyes. For a second I saw a tiny crack appear in the fortress of loneliness she had built around herself. But then her jaw tightened, the softness disappearing. "You will be punished for this," she whispered. It sounded less like a threat and more like a fact she was forcing herself to accept. Before I could find the words to respond, a new sound came from outside the door. A rustle of heavy robes, the scrape of boots, and angry voices, low and urgent. My stomach twisted into a cold knot. They were coming back. She spun around, her eyes wide, and grabbed my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. For a moment, I could feel the frantic beat of her pulse against my wrist, a mirror of my own. "Promise me," she said, her voice urgent, her eyes flashing with a fire I hadn't seen before. "Promise me you won't look away, no matter what they say, no matter what they threaten to do." Fear, cold and sharp, clawed its way up my ribs. Every instinct screamed at me to drop my eyes, to bow my head, to save myself. But looking at her, at the desperate hope in her face, I found a strength I didn't know I had. I gave a single, firm nod. "I promise." The doors didn't just open this time. They were thrown open, crashing against the walls with a violence that shook the floor. 5 men stormed into the room, 3 of the guards from before, a priest draped in white robes that seemed too clean for this world, and a tall, imposing figure. He was cloaked in black, the fabric so dark it seemed to swallow the torchlight. On his chest was a silver seal that glinted coldly. Authority rolled off him in waves, sharp and merciless. His eyes scanned the room and landed on me, still kneeling at the princess's feet. His lip curled back in a sneer of pure disgust. "So it's true," he spat, his voice like gravel and ice. "The outlaw dares to break the sacred decree." The princess stepped in front of me, a fragile shield against his venom. Her chin was high, her voice trembled, but it was loud and clear. "He has done nothing wrong. I let him see me." A gasp went through the room. The priest took a step back as if she had struck him. The cloaked man's eyes narrowed, the sneer twisting into a mask of rage. "Then you have cursed us both," he hissed, and then he lifted his hand. It wasn't a wave. It was a signal. Steel flashed in the torchlight. The guards drew their blades, the sound of metal scraping against leather, echoing in the sudden silence. For the first time, I truly felt the weight of her secret, of her existence. It wasn't just a burden on her shoulders anymore. It was pressing down on mine, too. The guards surged forward, their movements practiced and deadly, like wolves closing in for the kill. Their blades were pointed right at my heart. But the princess didn't move. She just lifted her hand, a sharp, commanding gesture that stopped them in their tracks. Her eyes never left the cloaked man's face. They were locked on him, steady and unflinching. "Enough," she said. Her voice rang out, clear and powerful, striking against the stone walls. This wasn't the timid whisper from the litter. This was the voice of someone who was born to rule, a voice that had been silenced for far too long. The cloaked man stiffened, his signal hand still raised. "You dare break the vow your own father swore?" he snarled, flecks of spittle flying from his lips. "The veil was your covenant, a pact with the gods to protect this kingdom. You show your face and kingdoms fall." The princess took a slow, deliberate breath. I could see she was trembling, but it wasn't from fear. It was from a deep, simmering fury that was finally boiling over. "It wasn't my father's vow," she said, her voice dangerously calm. She lifted the blindfold, holding it high for all of them to see. "It was yours. A vow you used to keep me a prisoner. A story you told to guard your own power. And now the very first man to see me with clear eyes calls me human, not a curse." She glanced at me, and in that one look, I understood everything. I knew what the cloaked figure feared more than anything else. It wasn't her beauty. It wasn't some mythical curse in her eyes. It was the simple, terrifying possibility that someone might see her for who she was, and that someone might love her. "You don't understand the power you're playing with," the cloaked man hissed, his voice dropping to a low, venomous whisper. "If she belongs to you, she can no longer belong to us." He turned his burning gaze back to me. "Do you even know what you've taken, outlaw?" Heat rose in my blood, a hot wave of defiance. "I didn't take anything," I said, my voice hard. "She gave me something you never could. The truth. His hand snapped down, sharp and final as a falling blade. It was the signal again. The guards lunged, their swords raised. The princess cried out my name. But before the steel could reach me, something else happened, something none of us expected. A horn blew in the distance. It was a deep, mournful sound, a lonely call that echoed through the palace halls. The guards froze mid-stride, their blades inches from my throat. Their faces went pale under their helmets. The cloaked man's eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief, then dawning horror. "No," he breathed. "It cannot be." The princess straightened up, her hand gripping my sleeve so tightly I could feel her knuckles press against my arm. "What is that?" I whispered, my eyes still fixed on the guards' swords. She turned her face toward the sound, toward the world outside these walls. And for the very first time since I'd laid eyes on her, I saw a glimmer of something that looked like hope. "That horn," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It is only ever blown when the people gather at the palace gates." She looked back at me, her eyes wide and bright. "If they've come, they must have heard." The cloaked man's face, which had been a mask of cold authority, finally cracked. Rage and fear battled for control. He shoved the priest aside, his voice a raw bellow. "Seal the gates! Do not let them near her! Do not let them see!" But the horn blew again, louder this time, closer. And it wasn't alone. It was joined by a rising sound, the murmur of 100 voices, then 1,000, carried on the night wind like the roar of a coming storm. The princess leaned in, her breath trembling against my ear. "They have never dared to come for me before," she whispered, a note of awe in her voice. Now they will see what you have seen." The call of that horn didn't fade. It grew. It multiplied. It was as if every rooftop in the city had sprouted a horn and was blaring a single defiant note. By the time the echo of the second blast settled, the murmur of voices outside the palace walls was no longer a murmur. It was a roar. A tide of sound, swelling with words I couldn't quite make out, but the feeling behind them was clear. Anger, hope, demand. The princess's hand was still clamped on my arm, her knuckles bone white. "They know," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "Somehow, they know." The cloaked man's face was a storm of fury cracking under the pressure of pure fear. "Keep her hidden," he roared at the guards, but his voice was thin against the noise from outside. The guards hesitated, their loyalty, once so absolute, now split. Their eyes kept shifting from him to the massive gates, as if they could feel the weight of the people pressing against the stone. For years they had followed his orders without question, but fear of one man was nothing compared to the fear of 1,000 angry citizens. I leaned closer to the princess, my voice a low rumble. "Do you want them to see you?" Her eyes, blazing brighter than any torch in the room, were fixed on the heavy doors. Her answer was immediate, fierce. "All my life I have been unseen. Tonight I will be known." Before the cloaked man could shout another order, she pulled me with her, moving toward the grand archway that led to the courtyard. The guards instinctively stepped forward to block us, but then a new sound started, a heavy, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. The people weren't just shouting anymore. They were pounding on the gates, first with fists, then with rocks, then with the heavy butts of farm tools and hunting spears. The huge iron gates shook on their hinges, groaning under the assault. And then a chant rose from the chaos, clear and unified. Her name. They were chanting her name. She stopped dead, her eyes wide with disbelief, as if hearing her own name spoken by the people was a miracle she'd never dared to dream of. "They remember me," she breathed. The cloaked man spat on the floor, his hand rising as if he was about to strike her down right there. But I moved faster. I stepped between them, my body a shield, my chest tight with a rage so pure it burned. "Touch her," I growled. the rawness in my own voice surprising me. "And I'll tear that cloak from your back with my bare hands." For a single, stretched-out heartbeat, the only sound was the pounding on the gates. Then, with a scream of tortured metal, the gates burst inward. A river of light poured into the courtyard, lanterns, hundreds of them, bobbing in the night. A sea of faces, villagers, farmers, merchants, children, poured through the opening. They carried torches and bread loaves, broken tools and tree branches. They were not an army, but they were something more powerful. They were the people. At the very front, a woman so old her back was bent into a question mark lifted her voice, and it was as rough and strong as the ancient stones of the palace itself. "We have come for the daughter you stole from us," she cried. The crowd roared in answer, surging forward until the line of palace guards wavered and broke. The princess's breath caught in her throat. The blindfold, still clutched in her hand, fluttered in the sudden wind, a pale ghost against the firelight. She turned to me, her eyes searching mine. "If I step forward now," she whispered, "they will never let me go back into the shadows." A fire burned in my chest as I looked at her. This woman who had lived her life as a ghost, who had asked only for one person to see her. Now the whole world was waiting. "Then step," I whispered back, "and I'll step with you." She took a deep, shuddering breath. Her fingers opened, and the silk blindfold, the symbol of her prison, fell to the stone floor, and she walked forward into the light. The crowd went silent as one, their torches lowered like a field of wheat bowing in the wind. And for the first time in her entire life, her people looked at her. The hush that fell over the courtyard was as fragile as a pane of glass, and the cloaked man was the one to shatter it. He strode forward, his black robes a slash of darkness against the sea of torches, his arm raised high like a prophet of doom. "Do not be fooled by this trick," he thundered, his voice amplified by the stone walls, booming over the crowd. "She is no princess. She is the curse that brought the famine to your fields, the storm that destroyed your harvest. She is the reason your children were born sickly and your wells ran dry." His words were poison, slithering through the air like invisible snakes, coiling around the old fears he himself had planted in their hearts for years. I saw it work. Faces in the crowd shifted, their newfound hope clouding with old superstitions. Eyes darted from her unveiled face to his accusing finger. The lie was a deep root, and he was watering it with their fear. The princess stood her ground, but I could see her hands trembling at her sides. I felt the weight of his lie pressing down on her, trying to crush her, to force her back into the shadows where she couldn't fight back. I moved to stand beside her, my voice low, for her ears only. "He's speaking lies. But they've only ever heard lies. They've never been shown the truth." I looked at her. "Show them." Her lips parted as if the air had been stolen from her lungs. But then she looked out, not at a mob, but at the faces of her people. She lifted her chin, the last of the veil falling completely from her grasp. "You were told I was a curse," she called out, her voice thin at first, but growing stronger with every word. "But tell me, was it my hands that set fire to your homes when you couldn't pay the protector's tax?" A murmur rippled through the crowd, uneasy, confused. Did these hands whip the backs of your children when they stole bread to keep from starving? Did this face spill your brother's blood in the streets for speaking out? Or were those things done by the very men who told you I was to blame? The murmur grew louder, angrier. It was a question they had never dared to ask themselves, and now that it was spoken aloud, it couldn't be unheard. The cloaked man snarled, his voice rising to a fever pitch. "Do not listen to her witch's tongue. Her beauty is a trap. Her eyes are a spell. Avert your gaze, or she will bind your souls to ruin." But it was too late. Even as he shouted, I saw heads turning. I saw people locking their eyes on her, truly seeing her for the first time. And the longer they looked, the more their fear melted away, replaced by something far more dangerous to his power. Hope, a child's voice, small and clear, and completely without fear, cut through the noise. "She looks like Mama," a little girl whispered, clutching her father's tunic. Those four simple words spread through the crowd, faster than any command, faster than any lie. The father stared at the princess for a long moment. Then he bent down, lifted his daughter high onto his shoulders, and let her look without shame. "Then let her be seen," the father said, his voice firm and steady. It was like a dam breaking. The crowd roared, a single unified sound that rolled like thunder, a sound of rebellion and release. It was louder than the cloaked man's denials, louder than years of his lies. He spun towards the handful of guards still loyal to him. "Stop them! Blindfold her! Now!" But the guards just stood there, their swords hanging uselessly at their sides, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning conscience. They were torn between the orders of a tyrant and the will of the people. The princess reached for my hand, her grip no longer trembling but firm and strong. "They're choosing," she whispered, her voice raw with emotion. And I knew, in that moment, that if their choice held, the lie that had been her cage for 20 years was about to snap like a rotten thread. The air thrummed with the sound of 1,000 voices finally breaking free. It felt like the whole world was shouting, as if chains that had been invisible for years were now shattering all at once. The princess stood taller, her hand holding mine, her face lit by the torches, glowing with a strength that no lie could ever extinguish. For a moment the cloaked man looked cornered, trapped. His dark robes shifted around him like a shadow, trying to find a corner to hide in. But then a slow, twisted smile spread across his face. It was a venomous, terrible smile, and it chilled me to the bone far more than his rage ever had. He reached deep into the folds of his cloak. He did not draw a sword. He pulled out a small, golden vial. Its glass was etched with strange, spidery markings I didn't recognize. He held it high so everyone in the square could see it glinting in the firelight. "You think she is your freedom?" he shouted, his voice cutting through the roar of the crowd. "You think she is your hope? Then watch what she brings you." Before anyone could react, he uncorked the vial and hurled its contents into the massive fire pit that burned in the center of the courtyard. The flames, which had been a warm orange, instantly surged 10 feet into the air, turning a sickly, unnatural green. They spat and hissed, and a foul black smoke curled outwards, thick and choking, rolling across the stones like a living thing. Panic hit the crowd like a physical blow. Men grabbed their children, pulling them close. Women screamed, covering their mouths with their shawls. The roar of defiance turned into coughs and cries of terror. The cloaked man pointed a triumphant finger at the princess. "See? Her very presence poisons the air. Look how the sacred fire itself bows to her curse." The crowd staggered back, fear clawing its way back into their hearts, the old poison working its magic once more. Everything she had gained in the last few minutes was threatening to crumble into dust. I pulled her close, trying to shield her with my body as the acrid smoke swirled around us, stinging my eyes and burning my lungs. "It's a trick," I growled, forcing my voice to be loud and steady, praying they could hear me over the crackle of the green fire. A trick of his hand, not hers. But I could see the doubt flickering in their eyes again, the old wounds of fear reopening in their minds. The cloaked man stepped forward, his arms spread wide like a dark prophet. "Bow to me or choke on her curse. I am the only shield that stands between you and her ruin." As he spoke, he threw his cloak open wide, and from the darkness of its folds spilled soldiers. Dozens of them, clad in black armor, their faces hidden by visors. They had been hidden in the shadows, waiting. Swords flashed as they formed a circle around the crowd, their blades a ring of cold steel, forcing the people back into a terrified silence with the hiss of their unsheathed weapons. My heart pounded against my ribs, rage and helplessness boiling in my gut. But the princess's voice cut through it all. "Let me speak," she whispered, her hand tightening on mine. "If I don't speak now, his lie will take root again, and it will never be undone." She stepped forward, away from my protection, right into the path of the coiling smoke. The black-armored soldiers closed in, but she did not falter. She raised her voice, and it rang with a power that defied the poison and the steel. "No curse lives in me," she cried, her voice rising above the crackle of the fire. "But one has lived for years in the hearts of those who profit from your fear." Her words were like a stone thrown into a still pond, the ripples pushing outward against the tide of terror. I saw a few villagers straighten their shoulders. I saw fists clench. I saw eyes turning from her to the cloaked man, not with fear, but with a new, burning anger. He saw it too, and for the first time his triumphant smile faltered. The battle for their hearts, for their belief, wasn't over. The tide was turning again, dangerously, desperately, and the night was far from done. The crowd was a trapped animal, caught between two powerful forces. The fear of the cloaked man and his black-armored soldiers pushed them back, while the princess's courage pulled them forward. The soldiers moved like a pack of wolves, their blades glinting under the eerie green light of the fire, tightening their circle, treating the people like prey they had already cornered. The cloaked man raised his hand again, and the green smoke swelled, hissing with a sound that seemed hideously alive. "Bow," he commanded, his voice low now, but sharp enough to slice through the chaos. "Bow to me, and I will spare you from the curse you have unleashed." But then something happened that he hadn't planned for, something he could never have predicted. An old man near the front, his back bent by a lifetime of hard labor, took his simple wooden walking stick and, with a final surge of strength, threw it directly into the green fire. "I bow to no fear," he shouted, his voice cracking as he coughed on the smoke. It was a single small act of defiance, but it was a spark. A woman nearby saw it. She stepped forward, shielding her child's face with one hand, but her own eyes she kept fixed on the princess, daring to look at hope instead of the cloaked man's terror. Then another joined her, and another. A farmer, a blacksmith, a young woman, each one a small spark, but together they began to push back the darkness. The smoke itself seemed to falter, to thin, as if it were fed by fear and starved by courage. The cloaked man saw it happening. Pure panic began to creep into his face, replacing the smug certainty. He grabbed one of his own soldiers by the arm, dragging him into the firelight, his voice a desperate scream. "Strike her! End this illusion of hope before it spreads like a plague!" The soldier, his face slick with sweat beneath his helmet, took a hesitant step forward. He raised his sword, but it trembled in his hand. He looked at the princess, who stood calm and still amidst the swirling smoke. A gust of wind lifted her veil slightly, and for the first time even her enemies seemed to waver at the sight of her unflinching, sorrowful eyes. She did not cower. She did not beg. She simply raised her hand, not to stop him, but as if to offer it. "You were taught to fear me," she said, her voice soft, yet it carried through the sudden stillness with perfect clarity. "But I am only a woman, like the mothers who raised you, like the daughters you vowed to protect. Do not let him blind you with a lie." The soldier stared at her, his sword still raised. The entire square held its breath. Then, with a loud clang that echoed off the stone, his sword fell from his hand. It did not fall toward her. It fell to the ground. Gasps rippled through the crowd, then a tentative cheer. The cloaked man roared in pure fury. He shoved the disgraced soldier aside so hard the man stumbled and fell. He lifted his golden vial one last time, holding the last few drops of its contents. "Then choke with her," he bellowed, and he hurled the last of the liquid into the fire. The flames howled. They flared so high they painted the entire sky a venomous green. But this time, something was different. This time, instead of spreading fear, the blaze seemed to turn on its master. The smoke did not roll out into the crowd. It twisted, curling inward, wrapping around the cloaked man's dark robes, as if his own poison had finally turned traitor. He staggered backward, clawing at the air, his mask of authority slipping to reveal eyes that were wild with terror. The villagers watched, caught between awe and dread, as the man who had ruled their lives through fear for so many years began to choke on his own creation. But his grip on this kingdom was not yet broken. His soldiers, though shaken, still held their circle. The fire may have betrayed him, but his knights still demanded blood before they would release their hold. The fire coiled around the cloaked man like a nest of green serpents, the smoke hissing and clawing at him. But he was fighting it, still clawing his way towards the princess, dragging his own personal storm with him. "She is the curse!" he shrieked, his voice cracking, his face half hidden by the acrid smoke. "Blind yourselves or be destroyed with me!" But no one looked away this time. The old man who had thrown his stick into the fire raised his voice again, shouting over the cloaked man's screams. "Look at her!" The cry was picked up by another voice, then 10, then 100. It wasn't a plea, it was a command. "Look at her!" One by one, the villagers who had been bent under the weight of his fear for so long lifted their heads. Their eyes, clear and defiant, were fixed, not on the smoke, not on the dying tyrant, but on her. The soldiers in their black armor faltered, their circle broke, because they too were the sons of mothers and the fathers of daughters. They looked at her, and they could no longer see a monster. The princess reached up, her hand trembling but steady, with a resolve that seemed forged in the green fire itself. She took hold of the veil that had been her prison, and slowly, deliberately, she pulled it from her face. The square went utterly silent. She was not a curse, she was not a shadow. She was a woman, and across her left cheek, from her temple to the corner of her mouth, ran a pale silver scar, a mark of imperfection, a mark of humanity. It was the curse he had twisted into a tool of control, a simple flaw he had magnified into a monstrous legend. Tears streamed down her cheeks, shining like diamonds against the green blaze, and in that moment the entire kingdom saw the truth. She hadn't been hidden to protect them. She had been hidden to keep her strength, her courage, her very human heart from undoing the lies of a powerful man. The cloaked man gave one last, desperate lunge, his hand outstretched, trying to cover her face again, to pull the shadows back over her. But the soldier who had dropped his sword moved first. He slammed his armored body into the cloaked man, throwing him to the ground. The golden vial, which had been clutched in the cloaked man's hand, flew through the air and shattered against the stones of the fire pit. The green fire shrieked as if it had been stabbed, then it collapsed in on itself, curling into nothing, burning itself out in a final pathetic hiss. Silence. A deep, profound silence followed, broken only by the ragged breathing of 1,000 people who had stood frozen for too long. Slowly, like a wave, the villagers began to kneel. Not in fear this time, but in reverence. Their heads bowed toward her as one. The soldier who had saved her pressed a fist to his chest, the ultimate sign of loyalty, and one by one the other soldiers did the same, their swords now pointed at the ground. The cloaked man struggled once more, spitting curses that were lost in the sudden quiet. But his own fire had consumed the edges of his cloak, and he was dragged away by his former soldiers, a powerless man, his voice finally lost to the ash. The princess lowered her gaze from her people, her veil still clutched in her hand, and then she turned to me. For all these days I had obeyed the law, never daring to lift my eyes to the sky, but now she whispered my name. "Look at me." And I did. I saw the scar. I saw the years of loneliness in her eyes. But none of it mattered. What shone from her wasn't perfection. It was the profound grace of finally being seen for exactly who she was. The villagers watched as she placed her hand over mine, the blue silk scarf from the auction block still caught between our palms. "No one was ever allowed to look at me," she said softly, her voice carrying through the hushed night. "But you did, and you stayed." I bowed my head, not in servitude, but in promise. I knew in that moment that I was not her servant, not her property. I was her choice. And as one, the people rose with us, finally free. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales of courage from stories left behind. If you had been told never to look at her, would you have obeyed the law or dared to see her face? Let us know in the comments below.